The cranberry sauce was still bubbling on the stove when my husband, Damien, stood up at the head of our Thanksgiving table. Our children, adults now, were home, and the air was thick with the scent of sage and butter. The sound of his chair scraping against the hardwood floor cut through the comfortable family chatter. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice rehearsed. And then he dropped the bombshell. He was selling our home for a new business venture with his young, ambitious partner. He detailed his plans with the cold precision of a developer discussing quarterly earnings, completely oblivious to the devastation he was causing. The silence that followed was deafening. My children's faces crumbled, but I simply stood up, walked to my purse, and retrieved a cream-colored envelope. I placed it beside his plate, right next to the turkey he was carving. "Since you're making announcements," I said quietly, a small, knowing smile on my face. "Then so am I." The panic that flashed in his eyes as he looked at the envelope was priceless. He didn't know it yet, but the little bombshell he'd just dropped was about to be dwarfed by the one I was handing him. My husband's fingers hovered over the cream-colored envelope like it might bite him. The confident real estate developer who had just announced he was dismantling our life was gone, replaced by a man whose face was a study in pure panic. He pocketed the envelope without opening it, the unspoken tension a new guest at our Thanksgiving table. My children, Hunter and Faith, looked from their father to me, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. But for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of calm. The silence spoke volumes, a narrative of betrayal and quiet resolve. As I sat there, watching the man I had built a life with squirm, my mind drifted back, not to the dramatic end of our marriage, but to the gentle sunlit beginning. To a time when our life was not a battlefield, but a garden we tended together. Our story wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow, steady bloom, rooted in shared values and simple joys. Damien, the ambitious young real estate developer, and me, a young mother who had put my own dreams on hold to build a home. For 2 decades, our life had been a masterpiece of quiet domesticity. He built his empire, and I built our sanctuary. My days were a rhythm of carpools, grocery lists, and volunteering at the school library. We were a team, a well-oiled machine. Our home, a charming colonial on a quiet tree-lined street, was the heart of it all. I chose the paint colors, planted the hydrangeas in the front yard, and nurtured every memory within its walls. When the kids grew up and left for college, a new, quiet chapter began. Hunter was in Chicago, a rising star in finance. Faith was in Seattle, chasing her dreams of becoming a marine biologist. The house felt empty, and a small, quiet loneliness settled in. That's when I found my job, a part-time cashier at the local grocery store. It wasn't about the money, it was about filling the void, a way to connect with the world outside our quiet home. I loved the rhythm of the work, the friendly faces, the small talk with Mrs. Gable about her knitting club and Mr. Henderson's grandkids. I was Alara, the friendly cashier, not just Damien's wife. It was a small but vital piece of my identity. Damien, however, saw it differently. "My superstar cashier," he'd say at dinner parties, a playful jab that I now realized was laced with condescension. His friends would chuckle politely. He wanted me to be small, to be grateful, to be dependent. And for a long time, I let him. I smiled along, pretending not to notice the subtle shift in his tone, the way he would dismiss my work as a quaint hobby. He was the provider, the one who brought home the big paychecks and secured our future. He was the one who was important, or so I was led to believe. The cracks started to show about a year ago. Small, almost imperceptible fissures in our routine. He began working later and later. He'd come home exhausted, smelling of expensive restaurants and a new kind of ambition I didn't recognize. "Just a big project," he'd say, "a new development on the other side of town. You know how it is, Alara? I have to put in the hours." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was the provider, the one who carried the financial burden. My small income from the supermarket was just fun money. Then, his phone started to buzz at all hours, an insistent nagging sound that invaded our quiet moments. He'd glance at it, a flicker of something in his eyes, and then dismiss it. "Just work," he'd say. "New project." But it was more than that. He'd start making plans without me. He'd have meetings on weekends, lunches with clients, and business trips that lasted a few extra days. The man who once couldn't wait to get home was now a stranger in his own house. He started to critique the house, the home I had nurtured for 2 decades. "This wallpaper is dated, Ilara. The kitchen feels too small now. We need to modernize." He used the word "we," but it was clear he meant I. He was already mentally redecorating, re-envisioning, and rebuilding our future, without me in it. His critiques weren't about improving our life. They were about dismantling it. He was creating distance, a justifiable reason to walk away. The most painful part was the way he began to treat my job. My small, humble role as a supermarket cashier was a source of pride for me. It was a place where I felt valued and connected. But for Damien, it became a joke. "My wife, the checkout girl," he'd say at dinner parties, a smirk on his face. His friends would laugh, a polite, uncomfortable sound. It was his way of reminding me of my place, of his superiority. He wanted me to be small, to be grateful, to be dependent, and for a long time, I let him. The night he came home with a bottle of expensive champagne, I thought he was celebrating an anniversary, a milestone, or a big sale. Instead, he made an offhand comment about our finances. "We're a little overextended, Ilara," he said, popping the cork. "I've had to liquidate some of our smaller assets." I swallowed my fear, the taste of champagne suddenly bitter on my tongue. "What assets, dear?" I asked, my voice steady. "Oh, nothing you'd be interested in," he replied, already pouring himself a second glass. "Just some old investments." I now know those old investments were assets I had contributed to and helped build over the years. Assets that were as much mine as his. But at the time, I chose to trust him. My moment of clarity, the turning point that would change everything, came not from a dramatic confrontation, but from a simple conversation with a stranger at the supermarket. One afternoon, a new customer, a young, impeccably dressed woman with a striking resemblance to the woman I'd seen in Damien's phone, came through my checkout line. She had a basket full of extravagant groceries, the kind we only bought for special occasions. She was on her phone, her voice hushed and excited. "I'm telling you, it's a done deal. Damien says by Thanksgiving, the house will be on the market. We'll finally have the capital for our new project." Her voice was like a physical blow. I stood frozen, my hands gripping the scanner. Her name was Serena. Her project, a new luxury condo development, and my husband, Damien, was her partner. I went home that day and looked at our house, not with love, but with new, cold eyes. Every corner, every room, every memory felt tainted. I looked at the man I had married, the man who had promised me the world, and I saw a stranger. A fraud. A man who had been secretly building a life for himself while slowly dismantling mine. The quiet, trusting woman he thought he knew was gone. In her place was a woman with a new resolve. I would no longer be his superstar cashier. I would be the architect of my own destiny, and I would make him pay for every lie, every stolen dream. The game was on. I went to bed that night not with a broken heart, but with a cold, clear mind. The woman who had wept silently into her pillow, the wife who had begged for her husband's attention, was gone. In her place was a woman who was done being a victim. The game was on, and I had already learned the first, most crucial rule. My opponent underestimated me. He saw me as Alara, the gentle cashier, the simple homemaker. He had no idea he was playing chess against a queen who had already planned her checkmate. My transformation wasn't instant, but a slow, deliberate awakening. It started with my job. I had always loved the supermarket, the quiet rhythm of the checkout line, but now it took on a new meaning. I began to pay attention in a way I never had before. I wasn't just ringing up groceries, I was listening. I talked to my customers, the same ones I'd known for years, but this time I was looking for something more than small talk. I knew Mrs. Gable was a retired accountant. I remembered Mr. Henderson mentioning his son-in-law was a family law attorney. The girl who worked in the deli, a bright young woman with a legal studies major, often chatted about her classes. My little supermarket, the place Damien had so casually dismissed, was a gold mine of information and expertise. The first step was to understand the scope of his betrayal. I started with his phone. The screen was always face down on the nightstand, but he had grown careless. One night, while he was in the shower, I picked it up. His password was still our old anniversary date. I scrolled through his text messages, not finding the dramatic, passionate confessions I had expected. Instead, I found something far worse, a series of dry, business-like messages with a contact named Serena Ashworth. The messages were clinical, professional, but they told a devastating story. The financing for the Ashworth deal is almost secured. We'll need to liquidate assets to free up capital. The house is the biggest asset. We'll list it by December. I'll handle Alara. She won't put up a fight. She's too busy at her grocery store job to notice. I could almost hear the smug tone in his voice. He wasn't just having an affair. He was systematically dismantling our life to build a new one with her. He was stealing not just my husband, but my home, my future, and my financial security. The Ashworth deal, the name of the project. I remembered him mentioning it in passing, a new luxury condo development. I found her on Instagram, Serena Vance. She was an up-and-coming real estate agent, ambitious and, as I suspected, the woman I had seen in my checkout line. Her feed was a curated gallery of her new life, a life built on my husband's money. Photos of her at lavish restaurants, at construction sites for her new project, and worst of all, a picture of her at a celebratory dinner with Damien, his hand on her back, his smile genuine and unguarded. The caption read, "Celebrating our future, so grateful for this journey." My journey, our home, our life, had become her future. The financial evidence was next. For years, I had a secret. I had meticulously managed our family's finances, creating a spreadsheet that tracked every cent. I knew every account, every password, every investment. It was a habit born from my past, from watching my parents struggle with money. Damien thought I was just a woman who paid bills. He had no idea I was the family's secret CFO. I started a new, separate spreadsheet. I logged into our joint accounts and began meticulously documenting every unusual transaction. Large sums of money were being transferred to a shell company I didn't recognize. Credit card statements showed charges for expensive dinners, luxury gifts, and travel to destinations I had never been to. The final, most damning piece of evidence was an email from his bank, notifying him that a personal loan had been taken out against the value of our home. He was leveraging our biggest asset, our home, to fund his affair and his new business venture. This was no longer just a story of a cheating husband. This was financial fraud. This was a man trying to steal a future he was legally bound to share with me. The anger, the pain, the humiliation, it all crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to fight. I made an appointment with the best divorce attorney in town, Mr. Richards. I had heard about him from a regular customer at the supermarket, a woman who said he was a bulldog in a suit. I walked into his opulent office, a thick folder of evidence in my hand. He was a silver-haired man with a sharp, no-nonsense gaze. He listened patiently as I laid out the story, the betrayal, the financial fraud, the photos, the texts. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice calm and steady, "you are not a fool. You are a survivor, and a very, very smart one. He made the mistake of underestimating you. We are not just going for a divorce. We are going for a full-fledged legal reckoning." He laid out the plan. We would file a formal request to freeze our joint accounts. We would legally challenge the loan he had taken out against the house. He would be forced to disclose all of his financial dealings, including those with Serena's shell company. And the best part? I would not confront him. Not yet. I would let him continue his fantasy. Let him believe he was in control. The element of surprise was my greatest weapon. I went back to my life, to my quiet home and my job at the supermarket. But inside, I was a different person. I was a warrior, a strategist. The woman who had once folded napkins for a perfect Thanksgiving dinner was now gathering her weapons for a war she was determined to win. I kept my poker face, my gentle demeanor, letting Damien believe he was still the master of his universe. I watched him move through our home, a ghost in the life he was so eager to abandon. He would talk about simplifying our lives, about how moving to a smaller place would be a good thing for me. I would just smile and nod, my mind 1,000 miles away, running through my checklist. Did I get the copy of the mortgage papers? Did I send the subpoena to his bank? He saw my silence as compliance. He didn't know it was a prelude to my victory speech. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that would make my checkmate so poetic, came from my own work. One of my regulars, a kind, elderly woman named Eleanor, had been a notary for 40 years. She was the one who had notarized our first mortgage papers, a fact she'd mentioned with a smile one day. "I always remember the young couples," she'd said. "You were so in love." I went to her and asked her with a fake, wistful smile if she still kept her old records. She did. And tucked away in a dusty old ledger was the notarized signature on our mortgage, a signature that required both of our approvals to make any major changes. Damien, in his haste and arrogance, had forged my signature on the loan documents, a felony in our state. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. The man who had mocked my humble job, who had dismissed me as an airhead, had just signed his own death warrant with a crime I discovered through the very community he looked down upon. I looked at the notarized copy of his forgery and smiled. This was it. This was the final piece of the puzzle. I was ready. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the scent of roasted turkey and the hum of a refrigerator. Damien was bustling around, an unsettling energy about him. He was a man with a secret, a man on the verge of a new life. He was completely unaware that he was also a man on the verge of his own destruction. The table was set with my grandmother's china, a delicate blue pattern that only came out for special occasions. The centerpiece was a cornucopia I had spent hours arranging. It was a beautiful scene, a tableau of a perfect family life. A lie. And as he stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, his voice full of forced confidence, I felt nothing but a calm certainty. The man he thought he was, the powerful developer, the man in control, was about to be exposed for what he truly was, a small, pathetic man who thought he could use others to get ahead. My revenge wasn't about fury. It was about grace. It was about proving, once and for all, that the quiet ones, the ones who listened and watched from the shadows, were the most dangerous ones of all. The envelope in my purse was not a threat. It was a promise of my new beginning. The silence at our Thanksgiving table was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It was punctuated only by the distant hum of the refrigerator and the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick a hammer blow against the fragile pretense of our family dinner. The children, Hunter and Faith, sat perfectly still, their eyes wide with disbelief, their forks frozen midair. Damien had just delivered his bombshell, and now he stood, chest puffed out, a man expecting applause for his audacity. He saw a stage. I saw a courtroom. "I'm selling the house," he had said, as if announcing a minor change in the dinner menu. "Serena and I need the capital for our new development. She's a brilliant partner. We're going to build something incredible." His words were a physical assault on the home I had spent 23 years building, the home where our children had taken their first steps, where we had hosted countless Christmases, and where I had just roasted a turkey with the kind of love and care a home deserves. He turned to me, a smirk on his face, expecting tears, a scene, a breakdown. "It's for the best, Alara. You'll be fine. We'll find you a nice little condo. Something simple. You can keep your job at the supermarket." The condescension in his voice was a final, poisonous touch. He thought he was giving me a lifeline. He thought he was being generous. He had no idea he was sealing his own fate. I rose slowly from my chair, my movements calm and deliberate. I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, Damien's smug, the children's terrified. I walked to my purse, which lay on the kitchen counter next to a vase of autumn flowers. My hands were steady as I retrieved the cream-colored envelope I had been carrying for weeks. It felt heavy in my hands, a testament to months of quiet work. I walked back to the table, the envelope a silent, loaded weapon. "Since you're making announcements," I said, my voice a quiet steel. I placed the envelope next to his plate, right on top of the gravy stain he had made during his grand pronouncement. "Then so am I." He looked at the envelope, then at me. The smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "What is this, Alara?" he asked, his voice losing its forced casualness. "Open it and find out," I replied, meeting his eyes for the first time all evening. I saw him, really saw him. The stranger who had replaced my husband. The man whose arrogance was about to be his undoing. Damien's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the envelope. The paper rustled as he tore it open, the sound echoing in the silent room. He pulled out a stack of documents, legal forms, bank statements, a notarized copy of a document with his signature. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. The color drained from his face, leaving it a ghostly white. The triumphant developer was gone. He was just a man staring at his own ruin. The first document was a legal notice of nullification, formally challenging his recent transfers of our shared assets to a shell corporation. It cited a clause in our state's marital property laws that required both parties' consent for any major financial transactions. The second was a subpoena, requesting a full disclosure of his financial records and his business dealings with Serena. The third, the one that made his hands shake uncontrollably, was a copy of our original mortgage deed, notarized by Eleanor, the kindly old woman from my supermarket. And next to it was a second damning document, a forged signature on a new loan application, a signature that was clearly not mine. You transferred the deed?" he whispered, his voice a disbelieving croak. "No," I said, a small, sad smile on my face. "I didn't, but you tried to. And what you didn't count on, Damien, was that the mortgage deed we signed 23 years ago requires 2 signatures for any major changes. That's a felony." The room spun. My children's faces, which had been frozen in fear, now twisted in a mixture of shock and anger. Hunter, who had always looked up to his father, stared at the forged document in Damien's hands. Faith gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You've been planning this," Damien hissed, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "All this time, you just sat there, acting naive." "No," I corrected him, my voice still calm. "I was protecting myself. You were the one who acted. You were the one who made the decision to sell our home, to destroy our life, for your new business venture. My job was simply to make sure you couldn't get away with it." Suddenly, his phone started ringing, the name Serena flashing brightly on the screen. The sound, once a symbol of his new life, was now an insistent, panicked alarm. He looked at it, then at me. The color had returned to his face, a deep, angry red. He was caught. He ignored the call, but it rang again and again. He looked at Hunter, his son, a silent plea for understanding. But Hunter's face was hard as stone. He looked at Faith, who was now openly crying, not out of sadness, but out of a profound sense of betrayal. "Dad," she said, her voice shaking. "How could you? How could you do this?" Damien's mask of composure cracked. He looked at the legal documents, then at the phone buzzing relentlessly with Serena's calls. He had promised her a new life, a new home, a new business. But what I had just handed him was not a letter. It was the key to his own prison. He had built his new life on a foundation of lies, and I had just proven with 2 simple pieces of paper that the foundation was never his to build on. My revenge was not loud or messy. It was quiet, calculated, and absolutely, perfectly complete. The dinner table, once a symbol of family, was now a crater of shattered trust. The silence, which had been tense, now felt like a vacuum, sucking all the warmth and air out of the room. Damien's face, a mask of shock and fury, was a picture of a man who had just realized his entire carefully constructed world had been built on a foundation of sand. His phone, which was still ringing with Serena's frantic calls, felt like a ticking bomb he couldn't defuse. He fumbled to turn it off, but the damage was done. "Dad," Hunter said, his voice hard and cold. "What is this? Forgery?" The word hung in the air, a weapon pointed directly at the man he had looked up to his entire life. It's a misunderstanding," Damien stammered, his eyes darting from Hunter to me. "Ilara, tell them. This is just a misunderstanding?" I cut him off, my voice even. "I believe the term is fraud. A felony, in fact. You forged my signature to take a loan against our home." "Our home, Damien?" "The one you were just so eager to sell to fund your new life with your new partner." Faith, my sweet, sensitive daughter, started to cry softly, her shoulders shaking. "Daddy, how could you? We thought you loved this house. We thought you loved us." The sight of his daughter's tears seemed to crack his composure. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the man he used to be, a man who would have done anything to protect his children. But it vanished as quickly as it came. replaced by a defensive anger. "This is not what it looks like," he insisted, standing up so forcefully his chair toppled over. "Ilara, you set me up. This is a deliberate, malicious attack." "An attack?" I repeated, my voice rising for the first time that evening. "I'm the one who stayed home and cooked a Thanksgiving dinner you were planning on destroying. I'm the one who worked at a supermarket, a job you constantly mocked, while you were out building a new life for yourself with someone else. I didn't set you up, Damien. I protected myself and my children from you." Hunter stood up, his jaw clenched. "You know what? I've lost my appetite." He looked at his father with an expression of such profound disappointment that it made my heart ache. 23 years, Dad. 23 years of what I thought was a happy family. And you announce your betrayal at our Thanksgiving dinner like it's a quarterly earnings report. He turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps on the stairs a final, damning judgment. Faith looked at her father, her eyes full of a pain so deep it was almost tangible. "I can't look at you right now, Daddy." She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate, and followed her brother upstairs. The room was silent once more. It was just Damien and me, sitting across from each other at the table I had set with such care. The perfect turkey sat in the middle, a cruel reminder of the life that was no longer ours. The envelope, now a pile of crumbled papers, lay next to his plate, a testament to his arrogance and my quiet, unyielding resolve. "Jordan," he finally said, his voice small and defeated. "We need to talk." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. The powerful, confident developer was gone. All that was left was a scared, small man who had just lost everything. "No," I said simply, standing up and beginning to stack the plates. "We don't. Everything that needed to be said has been said. Everything that needed to be done has been done. The rest is in the hands of the law." The days and weeks that followed Thanksgiving were a blur of legal motions and uncomfortable confrontations. Damien moved out in January, taking with him only his clothes and a few boxes of what he considered important papers. He left behind a lifetime of shared memories, photos, keepsakes, our children's report cards, like they were someone else's possessions. I was not alone in this fight. My children, my beautiful, strong children, rallied around me. They had been hurt, but they had not been broken. Hunter, who was an absolute whiz with numbers, helped me sift through the complex financial documents, his anger fueling a fire for justice. Faith, with her gentle spirit, was my emotional anchor. She spent hours with me, just sitting, talking, and helping me replant the flowers in the garden that had withered during the long, cold winter of my marriage. The community, too, rose to my defense. Word of Damien's betrayal spread like wildfire. My regulars at the supermarket, the people he had so casually dismissed, became my army. Eleanor, the notary, gave a formal deposition that solidified the forgery charges. Mr. Richards, the family lawyer, took on my case pro bono, telling me, "Ilara, you've shown me more grit and grace than any client I've ever had. It's an honor to fight for you." And then there was the downfall of Serena. The woman who had so eagerly anticipated my life's destruction found her own crumbling before her eyes. The legal documents I had handed Damien at Thanksgiving dinner weren't just for him. They were a legal bombshell that also implicated her and her shell company. The Ashworth Development Project, which she had so proudly posted about on social media, was halted. She lost her investors. She lost her reputation. And, as I later found out through a very public court filing, she lost her relationship with Damien, who, when faced with the consequences of his actions, threw her under the bus to save himself. One evening, while I was sitting with my children in the living room. A soft sage green that I had repainted, a news report came on. It was about the scandal surrounding a prominent real estate developer, Damien. He was being investigated for financial fraud, forgeries, and misuse of corporate funds. The reporter talked about his company, which was now in shambles, and his new business partner, who was also facing legal action. I watched my children's faces as they saw their father's downfall unfold on national television. There was no joy in their eyes, only a quiet sadness. It was a painful but necessary chapter of our lives closing. The final confrontation with Damien came in the courtroom. He looked pale, gaunt, and defeated. He had lost his arrogance, his smug smile. He was just a man facing the consequences of his actions. I stood on the witness stand, not as a victim, but as a witness to the truth. I spoke calmly, clearly, and without a trace of hatred. I detailed every lie, every forged document, every stolen moment of my life. I was not seeking revenge, I was seeking justice. The judge's gavel came down, and it was over. Damien was ordered to pay back every cent he had stolen, and the house, our home, was legally and unequivocally mine. The man who had so eagerly tried to take my home had not only lost it, but he had also lost his reputation, his money, and his family. He had gambled with my life and lost everything. I, on the other hand, had not gambled. I had simply chosen to protect what was mine. And in doing so, I had won back not just my home, but my self-respect and my future. The falling action was complete. I was ready for a new chapter. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday in February, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic about disturbing my morning coffee. I signed for them with steady hands, noting how Damien had filed first, his final futile attempt to control a narrative that had already slipped through his fingers like water. Mr. Richards, my lawyer, and now my friend, had warned me this would happen. Men like Damien need to feel like they're driving the process, he'd explained. Let him file. Let him think he's taking charge. Meanwhile, we'll be 3 steps ahead with our countersuit. I set the papers on my kitchen counter without opening them. There would be time to review Damien's version of our marriage's dissolution later. For now, I had a life to rebuild, and surprisingly, it felt lighter with each passing day. The house had become truly mine in ways that went beyond legal documents. I had repainted the living room in a soft sage green, hung artwork I chose without consulting anyone else's opinion, and converted Damien's old home office into a cozy reading nook filled with plants and natural light. The space breathed differently now, unburdened by the weight of pretense and hidden resentments. My morning routine had evolved into something I actually looked forward to: coffee on the back porch, 20 minutes of yoga in the sunroom, then whatever the day brought, without the constant undercurrent of tension that had defined my marriage's final years. Some mornings I gardened, others I painted watercolors that would never hang in galleries, but brought me quiet satisfaction. On Wednesdays, I volunteered at a women's shelter downtown, helping other women navigate the legal complexities of starting over, just as I had. The quiet knowledge I had gained from my time at the supermarket, the network of people who had become my silent army, now served a greater purpose. I had become a mentor, a guide, a beacon of hope for women who, like me, were navigating the wreckage of a life they once thought was perfect. Damien's story had taken a different trajectory. After Serena's departure, he'd spiraled in ways that might have concerned me once upon a time. He lost his job 3 months after the scandal broke, officially due to restructuring, but everyone knew his reputation for reliability had been shattered along with his personal life. His attempts to rebuild with Serena had failed spectacularly when she'd moved to a different state with her new boyfriend. leaving no forwarding address. I'd heard through my children that Damien was working as a freelance consultant now, living in a small, rented apartment and driving a 10-year-old sedan. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and planned other people's futures was learning what it meant to start over at 52 with nothing but his pride, and even that was damaged goods. But the most surprising development had come just last month. Damien had called me directly for the first time since the divorce. His voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Elara," he'd said, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but Hunter is graduating with honors this spring. I want to be there. Will you be there?" The question had caught me off guard. "Of course I will," I'd said. "He's my son." "I want to come too," he'd said, his voice hesitant. "But I won't if it makes you uncomfortable. I know I've lost the right to claim space in our children's celebrations, but I'd like to try to rebuild some kind of relationship with them if that's possible." I'd sat in my kitchen, looking out at the garden I had so carefully nurtured, considering my response. The woman I had been a year ago might have used this opportunity to deliver one final, crushing blow, to remind him of everything he'd sacrificed for a midlife fantasy. But the woman I had become understood that my peace didn't require his continued suffering. "Damien," I'd said finally, "Hunter and Faith are adults. Their relationships with you are their choice to make. But I won't be the reason you can't try to repair what you broke with them." The day of Hunter's graduation arrived with perfect spring weather, crisp air, brilliant blue sky, the kind of day that made everything seem possible. I chose a simple, elegant dress that made me feel confident, paired it with the pearl earrings my mother had given me, and drove to the university with the windows down and music playing. Hunter looked radiant in his cap and gown, Sarah, his brilliant girlfriend, glowing beside him. They moved through the crowd like people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, stopping to talk with friends and family who had gathered to celebrate their future together. Damien arrived halfway through the ceremony, looking uncertain as he stood in the doorway, scanning the room. He had lost weight and his hair had more gray than I remembered, but he had dressed carefully for the occasion. When Hunter spotted him, I watched my son's face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. What I saw surprised me. Not forgiveness exactly, but something softer than the anger that had defined their relationship for the past year. Hunter approached his father with Sarah at his side, and they talked quietly for several minutes before Hunter introduced Sarah to the man who had missed so much of their courtship. Faith joined them a few minutes later, and I watched from across the room as my children made their own choices about redemption and second chances. They were gracious, but not effusive, polite, but not warm. Damien would have to earn his way back into their lives, one conversation at a time, and there were no guarantees he'd succeed. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing on the terrace overlooking the university gardens, a glass of champagne in my hand. Mr. Richards appeared beside me. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Honestly," I said, taking a sip. "Better than fine, actually. Really, genuinely good." He smiled. "You've earned it." Looking back at my new life, I understood the profound truth of my journey. The best revenge isn't destruction, but reconstruction. It's not about tearing down the person who hurt you, but building something better from the pieces they left behind. The woman who had sat at that Thanksgiving table just over a year ago had been afraid of losing everything. The woman standing on this terrace had discovered that sometimes losing everything is just another way of saying you're finally free to choose what comes next. And what came next felt like possibility, stretching out as far as the horizon, bright with promise and entirely my own. If this story of quiet strength and sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, press that like button right now. My favorite part was when Alara, the quiet cashier, calmly handed Damien that mysterious envelope at Thanksgiving dinner, knowing exactly what bombshell was inside. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.